Good evening, good Tuesday evening to you. And I'm so glad we've got the Lord. Isn't it great to be saved? Isn't it great to know the King of Kings and Lord of Lords rules over the heavens and the earth? And there is nothing going to happen. I've said it for years. Some days I don't believe it down here. I know it's true up here, but there's nothing going to enter into our world that isn't filtered through the hands of a loving God who cares about you and me. And He's got a plan. And so we're in Exodus again tonight, in these first few chapters in Exodus, and you'll see there's some difficulties the people of God face in the will of God. And sometimes to get God's work accomplished, there's great battles. We're in an evil, godless world. We're in a world that's against God. We have spiritual wickedness, the Bible says, in high places. And certainly there are battles to be fought and battles to be won. And greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. And faith is the victory that overcomes the world. Peter tells us of the devil whom resist steadfast in the faith. Resist the devil and he'll flee from you. So many verses. We are more than conquerors through Him that loved us. And oh, what a great thing that we get to be a part of God's incredible family. And wow, won't it be great when that trumpet sounds and we'll be caught up together. And once we get over the shock and realize that we're not on earth anymore, we're on our way heavenward. Won't it be an exciting time? And I want to get every single person saved that can possibly get saved before then. And one of my burdens with this drive-in church, and looks like we're legal to be having drive-in church for a while until we get back into our building. And I certainly want to support our health issues and all of that. But you know what? It's soul winning is hard, and witnessing to people. It's not as easy to talk to people, and Sunday school work is not going on, and bus routes are not going on. It's hard for you to bring your visitors. Now I want to encourage you, if you talk to a neighbor, somebody, if God puts somebody in your path, talk to them, give them a tract, tell them we have drive-in church, tell them I'll drive by your house, you can follow me, park next to me, instead of sitting next to me in the pew, park next to me in the parking lot, and bring them into church. Send me a text, say, preacher, I got a visitor by my side. Maybe if I remember, I'll say, hey, if you're a visitor today, flash your headlights or whatever. But we're going to have to work at getting people saved. And there are lost people who need to get saved. And this is not a good time. This is not good for our folks in rest homes. And we need to care about people. Now, I want to mention here in Exodus, jumping right in where we were last week, so I don't take too much time. These are supposed to be 15 to 18 minute lessons, and sometimes they're going 22, 25, and you're busy, and I don't want to take too much of your time. But we don't have NFL, and we don't have baseball, and boy, my son-in-law and I were looking at something the other day. The NBA is having horse contests, shooting, not riding horses, HORSE. And he's in his backyard court. He's in his, and they're videoing each other. And man, what a mess we are. Let's go to Sunday school. Let's get back into church and all as soon as we can. But until then, let's look at our Bibles for a few minutes. I guess I shouldn't worry about taking too much of our evening. There's nothing good on TV. And you can only watch so much coronavirus news, okay? I'd be excited to see protests all over the country saying, let us get back to work. We got to get something done in this country. But if you didn't hear last night, it would be good if you could watch Monday night's video. But if you can't, I'm going to do a quick recap. I said Exodus is the story of the people of Israel. They came down into Egypt. Joseph was there first. The rest of the family, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, he had 12 sons. So the 12 tribes of Israel, 12 families, let's call them. They're all down, and they go about 70 of them down to Egypt, and then they grow. It's 400 years they're there before the Exodus takes place, around 400. And I use, if you don't know me well, I use round numbers. I'm not a numbers person, and numbers and details, I'll give you the principle. You go look up the details, but they get to Egypt, and Joseph dies, and he's dead for a long, long time, hundreds of years. And then Moses is brought up as the leader and the deliverer. The story of the 10 commandments. Of the plagues, the 10 plagues, and then Moses leads them out of the wilderness to go up Mount Sinai, get the commandments, and on from there. That's the story of the book of Exodus, to exit, to get out of the land of Egypt. Egypt, by the way, in the Bible is a picture of the world. One quick thought, I don't know if I'll think of this later on, but God didn't call Moses to change the political stance of the Egyptians. God called Moses to get God's people out of Egypt. And I'm not trying to bring spiritual revival and awakening to the government of America. I want people to get saved and call them out. A church, the word church is a called out assembly, a group of people who assemble, called out of the world. We're different people. And we are to be different. We are not to be of this world. Although so often people who use that phrase, sure look like the world, act like the world, sing like the world, drink booze like the world, social life like the world. No, we're not to be like the world. We're to be odd. We're to be a peculiar people, not just inside, but outside. But yesterday I said this, number one, the problems in a society come when it starts out, number one, when the government leaders, and in our case, when we elect leaders who do not know their history. There came a man in Exodus chapter 1 verse 8 who didn't know Joseph. He didn't know the story, the incredible story how Egypt literally owed their existence to Joseph and the people of Israel. And because our leaders don't know history, they start making very, very tragic, detrimental, horrible decisions. Number two, when the government starts inventing problems, they start imagining problems. And here this king who didn't know his history, and he said, what if a war broke out and the Jews joined with our enemy and they fought against us? What a big mess we'd be in. And there was no problem between the Jews and the Egyptians that we know of. They got along, and there was no war coming. There was no enemy coming. He was dreaming up. And again, I said last night, we're not saying don't prepare. Proverbs says the horse is prepared for the day of battle. Keep your horse ready. But victories for safeties from the Lord. A wise man foreseeth the evil. It's okay to be looking ahead, but we don't destroy a society because of something that might take place. And what the king in Egypt did, he literally destroyed a nation, the nation of Egypt, because he feared something might happen. Sound familiar? And so number one, when our leaders don't know their history, when American leaders don't know the Declaration and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, when American political leaders don't understand where we came from, why are we a constitutional republic? Why are we what we are? How come we became this? Let's go back and figure it out. And we don't have that. Number two, the government then invents problems that were not there. Number three, we talked about the government begins encroaching into the lives of the people. The government, in chapter 1, verse 11, they started messing with their jobs, and they took these people and put them into different jobs and forced them into slave labor. But when the government starts messing with your job, they have overstepped their boundaries. And when the government steps in and begins causing you and your job trouble or moving, when Castro, I have a good friend who was in Egypt. He was in Cuba when Castro took over. And he said that they came and took their home, they took their family business, and government people moved in, they were moved out, and the government controlled what jobs you had. The government took care of, as I remember, he said they shot his pastor. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. That's getting down the road a little bit, but they start controlling our jobs, and so the third thing that went wrong, and they did that here in verse 11 in chapter 1, and then in verse 11 it also says they put taskmasters over them, and it said to afflict them. And so the fourth problem is these evil governments, when they start getting their way and they start creeping into our lives, and no one stopped them yet, then they so here's the government and here's the people. And again, I'm pro-government. We have to have a government, but we've got to have that government locked down in their responsibilities, and somebody's got to box them in so they don't get out and take over what kind of ice cream you get to eat. And that is exactly where they'll go. They'll go as far into your private life as they possibly. In China, they're telling you can have one child. That's pretty far into your personal life. Well, there's a reason. You know what? I'm an American, and we don't do that in America. We're free. We don't choose careers for our kids, and a businessman can become the president of the United States. And boy, I love America, and we've got to protect America. And I'm so thrilled and honored to be an American. And the second greatest earthly thing I have next to salvation is that I'm an American. What an honor! And so we believe this. So the first They didn't know their history. Second, they began to encroach in the private lives, especially the jobs of the people. Third, the government, or second, the government started inventing problems that were not there. Third, the government began to encroach into the private lives of the people. And fourth, the government began appointing people to oversee what was going on and telling the common man what he could and could not do. So this is where bureaucrats come in. We elect these people. We don't elect these people. They're appointed. We don't even know who they are. Who says how fast you can drive? What size of a car? Not long ago, we had people in California telling us that we shouldn't be driving big vehicles, telling us we should burn less gas. And not long ago, we had our politicians saying, look, it's time you ride the buses and subways and be like the rest of the world. And boy, they're not saying that now. And so the government starts putting people over the common man that begin telling him what to do. And then the fifth thing I said last night is that those people that are appointed by the government begin just making life hard. It just gets hard. Harder to start a business, harder to start a church, harder to buy a house, harder to have a school. Everything gets hard. Our buses, it gets harder and harder for us to have our buses. And suddenly we can't have a bus that's over this age. And now a bus can only drive so many miles a year, and the people that are appointed begin making rules on the common man that just make life hard. And those are the signs of a growing and encroaching government. All right, let's look at some more. You got the book of Exodus out there? Look at Exodus chapter 1 and verse 15. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives. And the name of one was Siphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. So number 6, when the government realizes they can keep reaching into our world and telling us what to do, the government starts approving or encouraging killing babies. Killing babies. That is a part of a government involvement, a government encroachment, and the government, now it's our tax dollars paying. My tax dollars that I absolutely am against abortion, my tax dollars being used to murder a baby is a violation of every kind of decency and American right imaginable. And no government's got a right to take my tax money to murder innocent unborn children. And yet right here, governments do not respect life unless the people keep the government chained, so the government has to respect life. And I'm thankful we've got some people in Washington, D.C. right now pushing. And I was told by some people who are there every day, they said we've got more pro-life people in Washington, D.C. now than we've had in forever. And they said we are pushing. We've got a strong Supreme Court that leans to the right, and we've got more and more people in D.C. And you ought to be praying for God to get us a total repeal of the abortion rights issues. And so government begins killing babies. Now look at verse 18. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said unto them, why have you done this thing? And you've saved the men children alive. So these ladies, they weren't doing it. They just refused to kill the babies. And so now he's challenging these. See, number 7, the government starts asking people to do things against their conscience. The government begins putting you in a position. I have some pretty strong convictions about witnessing out on the streets and in public. I've got strong convictions about going to church. I've got strong convictions about the morality of my home and our community. I think I've got strong convictions about school and what school our children can go to. And the government has gone in already on many occasions and tried to tell parents, you can't put your kids in that private school. And you can't, and they're telling parents to go against their conscience. And by the way, all this history stuff, if this matters at all to you, you cannot have your kids in a public school. You cannot have your kids in a government finance school, because the government that is this encroaching, fire-devouring monster, you don't want them training your children, because they'll train your children to be cute little pawns to roll over and play dead and do what they're told. You want your kids in a school that's teaching them strength and independence and freedom and patriotism and Americanism. And and all those things that America was founded on. And so, number 7, verse 18 and 19, we find that the government starts asking people to go against their convictions. Verse 19, the midwives, I'm just going to say, in my opinion, they lied. The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. I don't know if that was true or not, but they said it. And God, verse 20, rewarded the midwives with their own houses and their own families as a result of them not being willing to take the lives. They had to rebel against the government's command to keep their conscience clean. And again, we see, and it's not unusual, it's in the Bible many, many times, where decent people say to the government, you have crossed the line, and I will not do what you told me to do. And in this case, murder of a baby was that line. And I don't doubt that somewhere along the line there were doctors who were in positions in hospitals where if they didn't perform abortions, they'd lose their funding or they'd lose their job. And I don't know. I'm just telling you, I believe there's a lot of great doctors who the pressure has been on these doctors. I know there have been scientists, people in research positions who did not stand with the man-made climate change world, who lost their jobs, who were ridiculed by the rest of the government. Because if you don't get underneath the government, see, the government wants to control the literal way we think. And when you don't submit to that, the government begins to put pressure on you. And so, number 5, these bureaucrat people, we call them, made life hard, just made life hard for people. Number 6, once the government realized they keep getting away with things, they start killing babies. Number 7, the government starts pushing people against their own conscience. And it's a sad and terrible thing. Look over to chapter 2 with me quickly here. And by the way, government has no respect for life and liberty. Government, in and of itself, has no respect for life and liberty. Our government was founded on the principles that respected and honored life and liberty, but they have long since jumped over that fence, and the cow has gotten out of the pasture, and it's causing all kinds of trouble. And we need to get that thing back in where it belongs. I'm pro-government, I'm for government, but I'm for that government being fenced in with a big old, we had a neighbor when I was a boy, he had a Morgan stallion, and if you don't know horses, I don't know a lot. I just loved that I had a horse of my own and was able to break this horse, train it, but there's a lot about horses if you're not familiar. But a stallion is a hard horse to rule, and I guess his fence had to be 12-foot high planks, big old planks to keep that horse. He would tear up a fence, he'd go over a fence, and everybody in town knew that horse because he rode in all the parades. But I think only the one man who owned it could ride it. That was a tough horse. It was a great horse, long as he was fenced in, as long as he was in the hands of a strong commander. And that's what government is, a wonderful thing, as long as somebody's got the reins, and as long as the fence of the Constitution is there. And so we have here in Egypt an unregulated, out-of-control government, and nobody yet, you're going to see in a minute, God steps in and starts slapping them back where they belong. But the Egyptian government, the king had, he had carte blanche. He could do whatever he wanted to do. So look at chapter 2 and verse 3. And so, verse 1 and 2 says that there was a man of Levi, and he took a wife, and she had a child, and it was a goodly child. Verse 3, and when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, made a little boat, and dabbed it with slime and pitch, put the child in it, and put a little lid on it, and put it down in the overflow of the river there, and just, it might have sat there, drifted a little bit, but she hid that baby as long as she could. And because the rule was you got to kill the boy babies. And here, these people are being pushed to do against their conscience, and she couldn't see. She was not going to let someone kill her child. She put him in the river. You know the story. The Pharaoh's daughter comes down, hears the baby crying, and Moses is in there, and his sister Miriam runs over to the lady and says, "Would you like me to get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" And she says, "Oh yeah, do that. I'll pay her wages." Well, the mom got the baby back and nursed him and weaned him, kept him maybe a couple of years, we don't know. And then he's in Pharaoh's house for the next until he's 40. And so number 8, the people are forced to go around the commands of the government. The people are now, because the government is encroaching, because the government is crossing our conscience, because the government is pushing us beyond the realm of government rights, because the government is like a fire consuming the world around it. It forces the citizens to begin going around government regulations and going around that which we should be honoring our government, and forced us to go around it. And by the way, there's good people on both sides of this. If you look down at verse 6 of chapter 2, when she'd open it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept, and she had compassion on him, and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." This lady was compassionate. They're on the side of encroaching and corrupt government. There's great people over there. They're in this corrupt machine, this corrupt monster, but there's some really wonderful people over there. And to hear this is Pharaoh's daughter, was a good lady, had a heart. She cared. She wasn't just going to throw that baby to the alligators. And once it was there, she took it as her own responsibility. And secular history says that the Pharaoh of that day had no sons, just the one daughter, and that she had no sons. And so this little boy became very precious. And again, this is not Bible, this is secular history, that Moses could have been the heir to the throne, ruler of all Egypt, and it's very possible that could be, but again, that's secular history. Now here's what happens next. Next, the government, if you want to go down, let's go over, and you know the story. Moses is there for 40 years. He's up in the wilderness as a shepherd, gets married, has a couple of kids, and God, the burning bush story, and God says, "Go down, I want you to tell Pharaoh, let my people go, because I want my people to go in the wilderness and worship me." And Moses, of course, there's arguing going on. Moses doesn't want to do it. And I think most of you are familiar with the story. If not, read it. It's a simple story. Chapter 2, 3, and 4, and chapter 5. And now, well, here's what happens. If Moses comes down with Aaron, his brother, he meets up with his brother. And I think, I don't know, but it seems like they might not have seen each other for those 40 years. I don't know, they could have visited. They're not that far apart. But he was out in the next country, and as a shepherd, married. But in Exodus chapter 5, let me read a verse here. "And afterward, Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh." So now Moses and Aaron approach Pharaoh. "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." So here's a simple thing. And by the way, if you have a Bible open, you might scribble a note. You go over to the prior chapter, about verse 22 and 23. God tells Moses what to say, and Moses didn't say everything just right, because there was a threat when God said it. God said, "You let my people go, or I'm going to kill your firstborn," which is a big deal. The firstborn is, well, that's a sacred thing. Even in the Israelite culture it was. But it appears that Moses softened the message a little bit. He was intimidated. I would be, you would be. And so in verse 1, Moses said, "The God of Israel," he said, "let my people go. We need to go in the wilderness, hold a feast, and worship." Now, simple as this, the next thing that happened, we're talking about the growing encroachment of government. How does a government grow? All right. Next number, I think we're on number 9 here. Government begins to encroach on the free exercise of religion. America was founded and struggled for a while, but once we got our Bill of Rights and once we got all that settled, we had the right. If you were a Catholic, you could be a Catholic, and you were a Quaker, you could be a Quaker, and you're a Baptist, you could be a Baptist, and we had the right to the free exercise of our religion. But the next thing that happens is government begins to come in and say you cannot freely exercise your religion. And we have had that in past years. In my 38 years here, almost 38 years here in this valley since we started the church, on several occasions I've seen the government creeping in, trying to tell the pastors what they can and can't do. And then the pastors, you'll see tomorrow night, because we're not going to get through this tonight, the pushback. I remember early on in the ministry, there was a bill in Sacramento, and they were saying that no pastor in the pulpit, because it's a nonprofit organization, no pastor can talk about anything that has to do with politics. And it was a big deal. And pastors from all over America rallied to Sacramento, because that meant I couldn't mention abortion would be a big one. I couldn't mention gender issues. I couldn't mention there's all kinds of Bible issues that become political issues. And when morality becomes a political issue, preachers should not stop talking about it. If it's in the Word of God, we should talk about it. But the government doesn't want us talking about it. And see, that's what we're looking at here. And so in verse 1 of chapter 5, Moses and Aaron said, we're leaving, we need to go worship. And in verse 2, Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. Now, we can't expect it'd be nice if our leaders in government were Christian and knew the Bible. But the fact is, if they don't, they don't. But we still want the right to do what we're supposed to do. And so number 9, government's encroaching on our jobs. Then government's encroaching on our private lives, just making it harder. And then government's saying you're going to kill babies. And then government forces people to go around government to keep their convictions and to keep their morals and their rights. And it's a fight. People homeschooling in some places because the government say, no, you cannot homeschool. You think, these are my children. They're not your children. And people homeschooling undercover and trying to hide that. And that's another one of those fights that had to be fought. And by the way, the one I mentioned years ago in California, we won. Government backed off. The homeschooling thing has been a fight, and then the government backs off and a fight, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow night. How do we push back this government? And then the government begins to encroach on the free exercise. And then look down at verse 9. Chapter 5, we'll just close with this one. Let there be more work laid upon the men that they may labor therein. And look at this little statement at the end of verse 9. Let them not regard vain words. You see, that king, when he looked at their religion, he said, what a silly thing. Those are vain words. That doesn't make any sense. What does it matter? And I could see governments looking at people's religion saying, what difference does it make? Why do you have to do that? And you can't do this. And what a vain look. I don't mind you having some religion, but it shouldn't mess with your children going to this certain school. And I don't care if you have some religion, but kids in the public school, I know young people who go to public school, and they say, well, we're in the public school, we're here. And in my youth department many years ago, a young lady say, well, we'll take PE, but we're not wearing the PE uniform. Oh, great. And they're not going to take swimming. They're not going to wear those clothes in public in front of guys. And see, government starts saying your religion is vain. And when religion has to pass the muster of the government, we're in big trouble, because government is godless. When we start holding our religion out to government and saying, do you approve, we've got big problems. Because I could care less if the government approves of my religion. And we have buried too many godly Christians and too many Bible believers who stood for our faith for us to bow and buckle now. And so, number 9, I said that the government begins to encroach on the free exercise of religion. They begin to creep in there and to cause us no end. And they say it's vain. Number 10, they say it's vain. It's just vain. The government doesn't understand. And you know what? The government doesn't have to understand. They just need to leave us alone so we can worship. And I love the story of my pastor. Years ago, there weren't Christian schools. Those Christian schools are not that, they're not an old thing. They're a newer thing in my life, less than my lifetime. And this is in the 60s. And his boy came home with a book that had all kinds of foul words in it. And said, Dad, I got to read this book. And his dad said, let me see it. And he took it down to the principal. And he said, I need to talk to you about this book. And the principal said, nice to see you, Reverend, again. And he was a frequent visitor in there telling what his boy ain't going to do. And the teacher said, what's wrong with the book? It's a classic. And the pastor said, the dad of the student, the dad is the one in charge, not the principal. And that's why you want a good Christian school. We want to run our school as a ministry of our church, administering to the parents, and we want it to be a joint effort here. And we need moms and dads on the same page. And we don't want to fight. We want kids to be with their parents, but get a school where the school is on the side of the mom and dad. But the pastor, he said there's dirty words all through that book. And the principal said, there are worse words than that in that book written on the bathroom walls. And the dad said, and when you make the bathroom walls required reading, I'm going to be back in your office. And the whole principal was so frustrated with him. Look, folks, they're your children. They're your children. And this is our country. This country doesn't belong to a political party. And if you haven't caught that most all these 10 things are representing a current political party in America, you're not paying attention. This is our country. It does not belong to a individual. It's not my country. It's our country. And boy, government is a scary monster. And we ought to be praying for our president. What a blessing. God gave us our president. He is bucking the tide, and I'm thankful for him. I hope you have a great day tomorrow, a great Wednesday. And look forward to tomorrow night, Wednesday night church. Yeah, we're not going to finish this Wednesday. We'll finish it Thursday, because Wednesday night we'll have our Bible study on faith. And I'm enjoying these Bible studies already. I'm enjoying studying and preparing them. And it's going to be online because of the dark. We're not doing our drive-in Wednesday night yet, but we will in the next couple of weeks. But I look forward to tomorrow night's Bible study, and then Thursday we'll finish up some of this. All right, God bless you. Have a great night and a great day tomorrow.